Good evening and welcome to Greater Somerville for February 14th, 2012. I'm Tom Champion.
Hello, this is Joe Lynch from the City of Somerville with snow alert information for Tuesday, February 14th, 2012. Based on current weather projections, the city is beginning to wonder whether it will ever snow again, but has decided to keep residents on their toes by declaring a snow emergency effective 8 p.m. tonight. During snow emergencies, parking is allowed on the odd-numbered side of the street only unless otherwise posted. Cars not moved from the even-numbered side of the street by midnight tonight may be subject to ticketing, towing, compacting, or sold for scrap. How'd that go?
Well, clearly you're trying to take my job.
My guest tonight is the Director of Communications for the City of Somerville, known as the voice of Somerville due to his melodic and soothing voice, announcing everything from snow emergencies to road race street closures to important citywide information updates. He returned to Somerville City Hall in 2011 after a brief hiatus working in the private sector. A Somerville resident, budding thespian, a graduate of Northeastern and Harvard, and the man responsible for keeping the mayor on the straight and narrow, it is my pleasure to welcome for his first visit to Greater Somerville, Tom Champion, Director of Communications for the city. That was nicely done.
Well, thank you. And I guess I should start off by pointing out that actually it's Joe that keeps me on the straight and narrow.
There you go. And I'm going to straighten out something else. To my sister Mary, who probably thinks that was totally real, Mary, put your keys down. There is no snow emergency. So I know she watches every night.
There doesn't seem to be any snow emergency anymore.
They're going to put you out of a job if we don't get some bad weather.
Well, yeah, I think actually it's just as well, and for most people it's just as well. I had agreed to come back when we got that little snowstorm in October, but I hadn't started yet.
Yep.
And that same night we had a snowstorm and a major fire. And Jackie Rossetti, with whom I worked when I was here before, and who's the Deputy Director of Communications now, had to work that whole weekend. And I saw how hard she was working. I sent her an email saying, I decided not to come back.
I can't tell you how many people say, what happened to that guy that used to call? And I said, well, Mr. Champion went on to another job. He's back. Well, we haven't heard from him in a long time. And I said, well, you can thank the weather for that. Yeah, so how you doing?
I'm doing just fine.
Yeah.
Of course, I never left Somerville.
Right. You're a resident here. Long-time resident.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I had no idea when I moved to Somerville in 1999 that I was going to end up working for the city.
Yeah.
And so actually that's been a whole series of happy accidents, and coming back has been an even happier accident.
So living here all that time, it wasn't until the entire city started getting phone calls from you that you became a rock star here in the city.
It is a very weird and narrow slice of fame, but it is mine.
Yeah,
and,
it is yours.
And I feel very fortunate to have it.
Part of it's easy because I didn't realize that, people watch the show, and I didn't realize it until a couple of years ago, walking through the aisles of Market Basket, and a woman came out to me and, you do a very nice show, Mr. Lynch. And I felt bad because I knew she was older than I was, but she called me Mr. Lynch. So I was like, it has its upsides and its downsides. But you do keep the mayor on the straight and narrow, because any communications that come out of City Hall, I would assume the vast majority of them coming out of the mayor's office are passing through your hands.
Probably the majority of them, but not necessarily the vast majority. I take a slightly different approach, I think, from a lot of press secretaries, in that if a department head has a relationship with a reporter and feels comfortable dealing with that reporter, I feel silly being a doorkeeper.
Right, and the mayor has to feel comfortable that that department head knows how to handle the press. I mean, I would assume that that's the way it works, too.
And once that relationship has been proven and you've seen somebody in action, then you want to let them run with it.
Right.
I mean, it's much better for residents as well as for government if people recognize that they're talking to as directly as possible to the person who's actually doing the work,
right.
As opposed to a mouthpiece.
But it's actually changed. The role of communications director or press secretary to the chief executive or whatever label you want to put on, it's changed drastically over the years.
It really has, and it's changed a lot just in the time I was away.
Yeah.
Of course, Somerville is unusual in a variety of ways. I mean, Somerville has always been special in two big ways for me. Now, I was at Massport for 12 years.
Right.
For much of that time, I was in a communications role. Eventually, I moved over to be the assistant to the executive director and later to work in the aviation department.
Was that Buckingham that you worked for?
No, actually, this was all back when Democrats roamed the earth. This was,
as opposed to unenrolled and independent?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, this was... I had come back from Washington to work for, do some work for Governor Dukakis in his return administration. But I looked around when I got back and I had kind of a temporary assignment that I knew would come to an end. And I said, well, gee, they're doing this interesting project on the transportation side, the Big Dig. Looks exciting. They really have got the bit between their teeth. What a great thing to work on. So an old friend of mine was executive director of Massport, Dave Davis, and I went to him and said, can you get me an interview with Fred Salvucci?
Yeah.
I haven't seen him in years, and I'd love to have an entree to talk to him. And he said, sure, I can get you an interview with Fred, but I'd rather have you come to work for Massport. And that's what happened. I did not expect to stay there for 12 years. But the reason that I bring it up is by the time I got to Somerville, I had had a lot of the experiences that press secretaries have to be prepared to handle in a city like Somerville. I'd been through big fights with unions. I'd been through major intergovernmental squabbles. I've been through faux scandals, and I've been through
real
problems
scandals
with real misconduct.
Yeah.
And very difficult public policy battles with entrenched special interests on both sides. But it took me 12 years to get that experience at Massport, and I'd sort of run through the whole list of them in the first 8 months that I was in Somerville. Yeah. It's a very intense environment. So it's unusual in that case. Or in that situation. It's exceptionally intense here. I think in part because it's big enough so that you have all of the drama and depth of a city, but it's small enough that we all know each other.
Yep. Yeah.
The other way, of course, that Somerville is different from a communication standpoint is because the job of press secretary here is aligned to, or is hitched up to the director of the cable TV operation.
Yep. Nice segue, because when people at home are listening and they're going to watch this program and they say, well, is that the only thing he does? Far from it. I've watched you in action before. So, your responsibilities are not just watching the press and how media relations are handled for the city. You also have prime responsibility for the cable systems here in the city. Not only the city-run cable, but also for SCAT TV.
Well, right.
So watch me suck up to champion on this one.
Well, actually, Somerville Community Access Television has got a glorious history of its own and is quite independent. The agreements we have for cable licensing fees call for a certain portion of the revenues from cable licensing to go directly, no strings attached.
Right. And those were negotiated years ago, but every renewal period they have to come back before the city of Somerville, the mayor, yourself, other folks have to look at that.
Right. And the state sets a limit for what percentage of revenues you are allowed to charge a cable provider.
Right.
And essentially what that means is everybody charges the same rate because cities and towns are all so cash-strapped that they just go to the max.
Right.
And then there is a less standard agreement, although it's become standardized over time, in terms of the percentage of that amount that goes to community access. And actually, because this is the first, SCAT was the first independent cable access corporation in the country. They actually are also pretty well set up in terms of the share they get of
the history is there,
and so, the role it plays in the community.
Let me just say this to our cable subscribers at home, folks who subscribe to RCN and Comcast. All those folks neighbors that you have of yours that have Dish Network, tell them to get rid of it, because the more people who have Dish Networks out there, the less money comes into the city.
Well, to be fair, all of us, even cable subscribers, benefit from the level of competition that keeps prices from getting totally out of control.
That's right. That's absolutely
right. So a little
right.
competition from the satellite providers is okay, even though we prefer to have. We don't get any revenue from them.
But to some of our,
city.
Well, I guess the point I was going to slide into too is, some of our viewers are familiar with who you are because they are subscribers to RCN and Comcast, and they get your television show on Cable 16, which is the Mayor's Report.
Right. Actually, after when I first arrived in the city at the very end of 2005, when I first started working for Joe. I took over hosting duties because we didn't have a host. And I wanted to get us onto a different footing, and after a while I did, with working journalists in the city.
Yep.
And
now you stole that idea right here from Greater Somerville, because you had Danielle Dreilinger on, you had
Tom
Nash from and they've all been guests here before. So I'm just going to say that you guys stole it from me.
That's fair enough.
Okay.
It was an interesting evolution, I think, for them, because I thought it would be good for. First of all, I knew Joe could handle it. I mean, he could definitely be interviewed by a professional journalist who had editorial control.
If the mayor can handle coming on this show, he can handle people from the other media. So
he enjoys coming on this show.
He has fun, believe it or not.
No, I've been here when he's been on, and he does.
That's right. That's right. You came down one night.
But anyway, the reporters, I think, were a little concerned that if they were going to be on a show where essentially their one and only guest was the person who controlled the show, that it would put them in a difficult position. But I promised them, and we kept to our promise, that they had editorial control, that there would be topics that I would hope they would cover in any given program, but they could cover them however they wanted, and they could take the questioning where they felt it should go. And I actually think that makes for a better show. I'm sure you have the same experience.
It does make for a better show because the mayor's been guest on the show 3 or 4 times now. He's never asked for format, questions. He doesn't ask for any of that stuff. And I think it shows, excuse me, it shows a lot of respect for the host. And it shows for the host to say, look, I'm not going to sandbag you when you come on the show, because that would be shooting myself in the foot. He'd never come back. Neither do you want to pussyfoot around some of the issues that are out there. Because the viewers who watch this show or read the media, the print media or the electronic media out there, they don't want to read something that's just going to powder puff, all the stuff that happens in the city. They want hard reporting on it.
Well, it's a fascinating topic for anybody who works on either side of the table.
Right.
But the general rule is pretty clear. Reporters need to be adversarial. They ought to be adversarial. That's what their job is. It doesn't work for anybody if they're not. The question is, can you be adversarial without being
antagonistic?
Exactly.
Thank you.
Exactly.
And we've seen it. I mean, you're in this business, Tom, and I've seen it because I'm a television. I like to watch a lot of news on television, and you see the adversarial situations that some of these guys get themselves into. They come in with the preconceived idea of what the guest is all about, and then they do the famous, what do they call them now? The gotcha moments.
Yes.
The gotcha moments. And my feeling is, look, if you're for a certain candidate or you're for a certain position out there, make that known right up front, but don't pose as an impartial kind of news gatherer or...
Was Kristen Green ever on your show?
No.
You remember Kristen?
Yep, the name.
She was a terrific reporter. She'd been an award-winning journalist at the San Diego Union Tribune.
Okay.
Covering one of the most corrupt city halls in America.
Yep.
And her Metro staff had gotten their award for uncovering municipal corruption.
Yeah.
She arrived in Somerville because her husband was going to a joint program at Harvard's Law and Kennedy schools. She later went on to the Kennedy School and got her master's while she was here. But she was just here because she had a spousal relocation.
Well, we've had many famous folks that have gone on from the city of Somerville, either traveling through or they originated from here. George Donnelly, who used to be with the Journal, is now the editor of the Boston Business Journal. Danielle Dreilinger, who recently left the Somerville section of the Boston Globe, is now over at WGBH. Brock Parker, I see Brock is associated with the Boston Globe now.
Right, and it's interesting because when he left, his great dream was to teach journalism, and he did for a while in the Carolinas, but now he's back.
Yeah.
No, and good reporters all. Kristen came here, and she was at loose ends. She ended up stringing for the Globe. And it took her a while to change gears because she assumed that we would be just like San Diego. There would be no access, and everything she found out would just be terrible.
Right.
But she never stopped being very, very provocative. And
I'm sorry, Hillary Chabot.
Sure.
Hillary Chabot moved on. She was one of the first ones to get the interview with then candidate Scott Brown. And a lot of great people. But those are the types of folks that you have to work with, too. You work with some great media types, and you work with some schlummeals. Let me put it that way.
As is implied by the conversation we're having, the cast of characters changes all the time. Just when you've got all your relationships down and you've got a reporter who knows his or her beat quite well, and you've got the kind of good working relationship where you can challenge each other and have a sense of what the reaction is going to be. People move on.
Right. But that's it's a challenge in that industry. We've had Kat Powers, the former editor of the Journal, Gillian Fenimore, the current editor, reporters from all those papers, Jamie Norton from the Somerville News was on one night, and all those folks say the same thing. It is unknown what's going to happen to that type of journalism, which, nice segue into social media. Social media has made your job, I'm making a giant assumption here, it's made your job easier in many aspects, but it's also made it more difficult to control the flow of information, the rumors, the downside to social media. Social media, for those of you, I always get in trouble doing this. Kat Powers says, Joe, there are people out there in their 70s that are a lot more savvy than you are. Tweets and Facebook and emails and all that stuff. When I say social media, you have citizen journalists these days. That makes your job a lot more difficult.
Yes, that particular part, the citizen journalist part, can be very confusing for the people who are doing it too.
Yeah.
Because it's a perfectly acceptable thing to do. It is in many ways a laudable thing to do.
Sure.
But journalism is a profession. It's a skill.
Right.
And for folks who are just doing it sort of as a part-time thing, you can quickly get in over your head,
right.
Or you can just have difficulty organizing the story you've got,
right.
And that does actually put an extra burden on the people who are dealing with you, because are you a citizen today or are you a journalist?
Right. Right. What slant are you coming from?
Are you at this community meeting because you live in Ward 3 and you want to speak your mind?
Right.
Are you at this meeting because you want to cover it?
Or you're sucking up to your friend who happens to be the alderman. All those things come into play, and that is why I was contacted, and I don't know if Cayenne and I had an in-depth conversation about it, but I was contacted a few months ago about somebody who said, you've got a great little show, why don't you do a blog associated with it? And I said, no. That's not what this show is about. This show is about to have the newsmakers and the people who shape our community be live on that camera. Let them speak in their own words. They don't need anybody else interpreting what they're saying.
Well, and so you've touched on another role, which is related but different. Not all reporters are good interviewers.
Correct.
And not all good interviewers would ever want to be reporters, even though many of them have come out of journalism.
Right.
So that's a whole nother emergent specialty that's got a very important and well-defined role in the overall information flow.
No, I understand completely what you're saying, because I've been on the reverse side of things. Reporters have called me, and you open up the paper the next day, or you go online and you read. I never said that. It was, it was completely taken out of context, and then, you're on the phone or you're emailing people to apologize that it was taken out of context. So it is a difficult thing. Communications is a difficult thing. If I'm sitting here directly across from you, we're looking at each other's eyes and we're talking like this, there's very little room for misinterpretation. Once that printed word gets out there and somebody else is interpreting it, it makes it all the more difficult. One thing
especially, to segue for you, especially when it's been pulled down to 140 characters.
Yeah, oh yeah.
In order to deliver somehow the essence of it.
Yeah.
All the context is gone, all the nuance is gone.
Yeah, I would have loved to have met the genius who said 140 characters or less. It's probably the same one that built the 12 items or less at an express line in a supermarket. Who counts how many items you have? I don't know who does that.
The clerk at the
The clerk does. You're absolutely right. It's the clerk.
But if you've got 6 cans of cat food, is that just a bunch of cat food that counts as one thing, or is it 6 individual cans?
I have 5 pounds of potatoes. You're going to count each and every one of those potatoes. Same thing.
Yeah.
See, Tom, we're connecting here. I mean, you can't do that over social media. Top stories in the city, though. You have to fend off some of the less than genteel people that we have in the city when it comes to some more difficult issues that the city faces. The mayor has to make tough decisions, and sometimes it's your job to finesse or encapsulate what the mayor did and why he did it. And you have to send that information out. You have to deal with the reporters. You have to deal with the general public sometimes.
Well,
How
actually,
difficult
one
of
of
a
the things
job
about
is
the
that?
electronic age is how often you are dealing directly with the public.
Right.
And that can be very difficult because people are expressing their displeasure very directly, and you have to interact with them very directly. There's no comforting distance between the two of you. But on the other hand, it can also be very, very good. You have unexpected moments of connection. I had one just this past week where somebody wrote in about credit card convenience fees online. Because the auto excise tax bills have just gone out. People are getting them now, and they're going online to pay them, and they find out there's a fee to use your credit card.
Levied by the city of Somerville.
Actually, it's not. It's levied by the processor, which is an independent company that
Okay.
a lot of cities and towns use, because when you bid out.
But is that levied on the city and you then pass that back, or is it, I guess I don't pay on the online system, so is it clearly delineated on the charge that says this is coming from the processor, or is it coming from the city?
The city doesn't get that money. The city benefits because we pay less for the service of processing.
For the processing of
our
the
excise
transactions.
bills.
Yep.
So when we go out to bid for somebody to perform the service for the city, and there are a couple of firms, one of them does an immense amount of business in eastern Massachusetts, and happens to be the firm we use for excise bills. When they process the payment, part of the way they make their money is to charge a convenience fee if you use a credit card. They charge us correspondingly less money.
I
And
gotcha.
in a funny way, it's a wash because
Right.
you have to pay the convenience fee, but you're also one of the taxpayers
Right.
who benefits from the fact
Right.
that we pay less for the service, that it costs the city less, and therefore.
I don't want to
it's
get
less money.
Tom angry with me, but in the banking parlance, that's called sleight of hand.
Well, I mean,
And people don't like paying fees, Tom.
No,
That's what I'm
I
trying to say.
understand.
You guys get the brunt of decisions that are being made elsewhere. You didn't make the decision about the processing fees. Somebody else made that decision.
well, purchasing rules limit the way
Right.
the city can go about doing this.
Right.
It's true people don't like paying fees. They shouldn't like to pay fees. But with a city, I mean, a business can decide, we're not going to charge the fee. We're going to absorb that cost ourselves because that will increase customer loyalty. It might increase the amount of business somebody does with us. There are good reasons why, if you do it right, even though you're absorbing a cost, your profits actually go up, or you certainly don't lose any money. But
This is why the man is the communications director, because what he is saying is, we want to make you feel good about paying that fee. Very nicely done, Tom. Very nicely done. Let's go on to a couple of
Okay.
other things. We got top stories coming out. You got some stories coming out. You had mentioned
Well,
a couple of things to me.
I did tell you before we started tonight that I did want to mention a particular story on the air tonight because we're just starting to get the word out on it, so it's a scoop.
Sure.
For Greater Somerville, and that is that the Board of Aldermen have been getting complaints, and we actually got a couple of email notifications recently, but this is where the aldermen are very good, constituent service, and where they're still very close to the pulse of what's happening.
Yep.
Not everybody calls 311.
Right.
They call their alderman.
Right. And their alderman's number is published.
Right. And their alderman is very interested in what they have to say.
That's right.
So one of these comes through the alderman, and that is this, it's not exactly illegal, but I think scam is still an appropriate label. It's a mailing that's been going out offering people a service contract if anything goes wrong with their water line. Now, this is the line that you do really own that connects your dwelling or your business to the city's water main, which the city owns. And if something goes wrong with that line, it really is your responsibility to fix it.
Right.
This form makes it look like the city is officially notifying you that there is this service available, which you really ought to have. It's very artfully worded, and if you read the fine print, it's actually fairly clear that this is not a mailing from the city, that this is not an official service, that it is in no way endorsed by the city.
Right.
So the message that listeners should take from this is if you do get a piece of mail that says important information regarding your water service.
Right. Let me just cut to the chase because I got it. If it's talking about your water service and it doesn't have the City of Somerville seal or it's not on official City of Somerville stationery, pitch it.
Right. And, well, I mean, the other thing to know is that in a couple of states, attorneys general have gone after these folks because even if you get the contract, apparently you have trouble getting the service if you need it.
Oh yeah, it's a scam. It's a scam. It arrived at my house, and I looked at it, and I'm not any smarter than anybody else, but if this had any smell to it that it was from the City of Somerville, I know what I would be looking for.
Right. Well, you're smart enough to use 10 words instead of the 100 that I just used. If you get it, throw it out.
Well, that's because I'm watching the clock, and I want to give you plenty of time.
So the other one, very quickly, is this one did come in through 311. This was an alert landlord whose tenant said somebody came by and said that he was from NSTAR and he wanted to read the meter. And she was suspicious about this, wouldn't let him in, checked with me. I called NSTAR. They said, no, meters are being read electronically.
Correct.
This is also in Ward 3 over in the Willoughby Street area. So once again, if somebody says they're from NSTAR and they want to come in for any reason, they're going to be in uniform and they're going to have very good identification.
That's right.
And they will wait for you to call the company. They'll wait on your doorstep if they're there for a legitimate purpose.
All of these people, we do have some seniors who watch this program, and any time that we have an issue that comes up like this, I will always say, err on the side of caution. If somebody comes to your door and they're looking to get in, or they tell you they have a service contract, always ask for identification. If they don't like it, too bad, don't let them in. We're going to run out of time here, so I'm going to have to say goodnight for now, but promise you'll come back and visit us again at Greater Somerville.
I will be happy to come back.
Terrific.
We can talk about other topics like theater.
And we have some things that we'd like you to do on Greater Somerville, seeing as you are a thespian.
Ooh.
There you go.
It's true. I won't deny it.
I want to thank Tom Champion, the Director of Communications for the City of Somerville, for being our guest, and happy Valentine's Day. As always, Somerville, stay safe and stay informed. Good night.